I'm Jim Tressel. This is Coach Ryan Day, and we're here on another episode of It's All About the Team. And there's not a better guy to talk to about that than the guy right in the middle of spring practice and moving on into the summer. And every day is important, but every day that team develops is important. And everyone in the world that's watching this knows who Ryan Day is, and it's been a blessing to get to know you and admire what you're doing. But I do want to give them a little bit of an intro.
Okay.
Just in case there's someone who's tuning in from some business that hasn't paid attention to us in football. Sometimes we think everyone's checking us out, but Coach Day is from New Hampshire, and I don't know if I ever told you the story that maybe one of the best quarterbacks ever at Baldwin Wallace is from New Hampshire.
I didn't know that.
Yep. His name was Mike Blake.
Okay. Mike
Blake's father, Bud Blake, was the coach at St. Paul's in Concord.
Sure.
And Bud Blake's father, Mike Blake's father, happened to be getting his doctoral degree at the Indiana University when my father was. And they were in class together. And then one thing leads to another, and my dad's recruiting the son, and he ended up playing for the Cleveland Indians farm system.
Wow. And
playing for the WFL, back when the WFL, 6'4", 230-pound quarterback, was just a beast.
There's a lot of great athletes coming out of New Hampshire. So
New Hampshire.
Doesn't surprise me.
But you're the leading passer in the history of New Hampshire high school, is what I was told.
Yeah, I was at some point. Yeah, I'm not sure if I still am. But
they're throwing it more now than they did back then. But, coming from New Hampshire, and the great story I heard was that you and Nina met in T-ball.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was she a better hitter than you?
Back then she was, yeah. She was tough.
She was tough?
Yeah, her and her sister, they're twins.
No way.
In the T-ball picture, everybody's shoulder to shoulder except for her and I. There's about 2 feet in front of us.
Is that right?
And no, but we grew up right down the street from each other. Her father was a basketball coach in town, Division II basketball coach, was there for over 30 years, the same place. And so that was kind of our community of growing up. And I was fortunate to be around some great coaches, which really helped me. Losing my dad at a young age, I really looked up to a lot of coaches in the community, and that really helped me.
They help you build your team.
That's right.
I was talking with A.J. Hawk on one of the other episodes, and when he came in the door, you knew that he knew all about the team. And so obviously it started at home and then in his great high school program. And I guess that's why my passion to kind of at my old age try to do something to add value to people is because I'm not sure we talk about the team as much as we talk about how we're going to progress personally.
Right.
But really, it's all about the team, and when you're around coaches, and that's why athletics are so important, or the marching band, or the engineering race team, I don't care which team it is, building that understanding that it's bigger than me.
Right.
And it's harder for our young people.
Yeah.
Because they're being distracted, and they got their phones, and everyone's talking, about what's in it for them, and it's a challenge. And so the opportunity we had to be around those coaches and to have a great bride like you have, you're blessed. Ellen's gotten to know her and admire her, and so then you went on, stayed right in state, played at New Hampshire, and Coach Kelly was the offensive coordinator.
He was, yep.
And who was the head coach?
Sean McDonald.
Sean. So I met Sean, and Chip and I just talked over at one of your spring practices that we remember the day at the Rose Bowl that Sean and I and Chip were standing in the middle of the field. And we said, look at us, 3 Division I AA guys standing at the granddaddy of them all. Man, we were like peacocks.
Yeah, I bet.
It was fun. And Chip reminded me of that the other day when we had a chance to visit. And so as you think about Sean, and you think about what did you think he, whether intentionally or just naturally, did to help you guys understand that it's all about the team?
Yeah. Well, it's you talk about growing up and Nina being about a mile from me, and then Chip, being about a mile from her, and we were all kind of in the same area. And I remember at a young age, Chip being over at my grandparents' house, and I remember Chip working Nina's dad's basketball camp, and so there was that sense of community back then. And then when I went on to stay in state and go to the University of New Hampshire, I just remember back then it was just all about winning. Mm-hmm. It was about winning, and it didn't really matter what happened in terms of how you played. As long as you won, then good things were going to happen. And as I've gotten older, to your point, I think, whether it's society, social media, however, things are nowadays, it doesn't really focus as much on the team. But elite people who are trying to do elite things know that they need a team around them, whether they're in the sport of football, where you have to do that, or not. Because when you're trying to do elite things, when you surround yourself with people who your strengths are their weaknesses and vice versa, they bring certain things to the table that maybe you don't, whether it's in your own family or whether it's, your staff. But in terms of football, man, it's really important, because you can't win a championship unless, you got a really good kicker, because, the left tackle can't kick the ball and the kicker can't throw the ball, and he can't cover a wide receiver. And so you need all of those guys, and you don't always realize it until you're in that moment when you're counting on that one person to do their job. And so, you come to, a school like Ohio State where you want to go chase championships, you want to win national championships. You have to make sure that you're doing your part as a team, but also embracing the fact that when you come to the building every day, there's things you can learn from other people that come from different backgrounds, that have different strengths and weaknesses.
Well, it reminds me that we evolved to believe that if we could get to the point where we understood that individually I am insignificant without every other person.
Right.
And that's important on a football team, that's important in a society.
Yep.
Every other person, the walk-on, the equipment guy, the trainer,
yep.
Every person is important. And we kept grinding away at Youngstown State, trying to become the best. And I'll tell you, the thing that really flipped it for us to get our moment to stand on the top of the mountain was when we finally came to the conclusion that it was bigger than us. Yep. We were so focused on Youngstown State. We want to be the national champions. We want to win it all. We want to go to the playoffs. And then, somehow we found out that, it's even bigger than that. It's the Youngstown area had lost the steel industry 15 years earlier. They were going through hard times. As we were getting better, we could see the pride that was permeating way outside the locker room. And then when the light went on to our guys that, this is bigger than us. Right. If we win this, we'll get a ring. We'll get to say we did it. But it'll be bigger than that. In fact, the biggest remembrance I have of when that happened, we go to Statesboro, Georgia to play Marshall for the national championship. And it was in 91. And we're down 17-3, and we come back and we win the game, win the championship. So, and at one point in the season we were 4-3. And then we won 8 straight. And we had beat Georgia Southern at Georgia Southern to knock them out.
Wow.
And they were like 55-2 at their stadium. So it was a grind.
Yep.
We get back to the Youngstown airport, 10,000 people. To this day, I haven't seen, there weren't 10,000 people when we won in 2002, came back. It was crazy. Took us an hour to get through the airport, get to the bus. Guy tugs at my jacket. It's cold. It was December. I had a top coat on. We were dressed tugging at my jacket. I looked at him, and it was an old guy. Probably looks like I do now, but an old-looking guy, and he's crying. And he said, "Coach, this is the greatest day in my life since VE Day." I'm like, VE Day? That's way different than
right, a football game.
And I just was stunned. And I looked back, and he was gone. To this day, I don't know who the guy was. And the whole way back to campus was maybe 10 miles, and there were cars lined the whole way, beeping their horns, late at night, going, and I'm thinking, wow, this is way bigger than us. And that's the same thing with society, right? I want my company to be great. I want my organization to be great, but it's bigger than that. It's what can we do on behalf of the entire.
Yep.
So what made you decide to go into coaching?
Well, just, going back to your point there, I think it's just, to me, when you look back and you recognize the teams that, there's a lot of teams every year, but the teams that win, the championship teams, it's usually they come together for a common purpose. When you're on a team, you're wearing the same jersey, you come together, you're practicing together, but does everyone on that team, do they have a common purpose in mind? Do they have a common goal in mind? And that's something that we've talked about with our team this year, is like really having that vision of what it is and what that purpose is, because it allows you to wake up with 2 feet on the ground every day when you know that there's a purpose bigger than you.
Yep.
And to your point, I think that's important for us. It's important for us this year, but to have guys who decided to forego the NFL draft to come back, and then a few other guys come into the program, you can feel that right now, where there's when they wake up in the morning, they're not just waking up because they have to be there at 7:15. They're waking up because they want to beat the team up north and win a national championship.
Yep.
Like, everyone in the team can tell you that. They're coming together for a common purpose, and that's what we hope in the end is what allows us to raise the trophy. But why I got into coaching, I think it goes back to growing up and all the coaches that had that influence on me in my life. And not having a father allowed me an opportunity to pick some of the traits that I saw in each of these coaches. My grandfather had a huge influence on me. My father-in-law had a huge influence on me. But also all these other coaches growing up, some things I liked, maybe some things I didn't like.
Oh, no
but
doubt.
when you don't have a dad, you actually get to choose the ones you
Right.
want.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the positives of my childhood. But then also it's the competitiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I would have a hard time not having that
Right.
competitive fire and just adrenaline week in and week out.
Yeah.
I love that part of it. That's the way I've always been. And then I like just being around people. I like being around the players. I like being around the coaches. We wake up in the morning, you're around people that you like, that want to be great, and the challenge of that, I think, is why I got into coaching.
We love the game. We just happen to love football.
Right.
Other people love other things,
Mm-hmm.
but being around what you love, and then seeing what I noticed growing up with a father who was a coach, that I could see, even though I was young and a little older, I could see the difference he was making with those people,
Mm-hmm.
and how he just loved doing it. And to me, there was nothing, and I think that's a little bit why I'm interested in trying to add value with this podcast. Sure. Is I like coaching.
Yep.
And I don't have a team, but can you add value to someone else, someone who you don't even know what value you added them? It was fun talking with AJ Hawk. There were a couple of things he mentioned that I didn't even know,
you remembered,
impacted him.
Yep.
And so you stayed on at UNH.
Yep.
And then you went to
Boston College. Yep.
And who was the head coach there?
So that was Tom O'Brien.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom O'Brien, former Marine.
Yeah,
who
yeah.
learned us so much about just how to be a coach, how to be a professional.
Mm-hmm.
Got my master's degree there. Dana Bible, who's a St. X grad, UC coach with the Cincinnati Bengals.
Oh, I know Dana.
And for me at that time, he's one of the best wide receiver or quarterback coaches I've ever been around. And so, growing up in Cincinnati, he would talk to me all the time about how the West Coast offense started in Cincinnati, Ohio. Paul Brown, he was Paul Brown's guy. And when Paul Brown passed, his career changed forever. And the stories of him coaching Boomer and everything that came with that, and then he went out to Stanford and had Bill Walsh in the crowd and had to run the West Coast offense. And so for me as a quarterback to learn that part of it was really the fact that our paths crossed. But yeah, I stayed there for a couple of years and really learned a lot about the passing game.
Well, Coach O'Brien, I'm sure, taught team being from the military.
Oh man,
I mean,
tough.
Yeah.
Tough, consistent.
Yeah.
You knew exactly what was going to happen a year from now.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, you knew. I mean, when noon hit, you knew you had to be. You knew you had to be on that field.
Yeah.
He was fair, but he was consistent. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I mean, that military approach and that team approach, you could feel every day.
Yeah. And that's something that we try to integrate with our teams to understand that. Look, we don't even pretend to be as important as the military, but we could sure learn a lot from them.
That's right.
And it was funny, at Youngstown State, in our stadium, at the other end of the building was the ROTC.
Yep.
And so we used to get to go and listen to their military green tab leadership, things, and all that. And because when it's life or death, it's pretty easy to be focused on the team. And so they know how to do it. Hey teammates, I want to tell you about a project we're working on with Youngstown State University. One of the ways Ellen and I have decided to give back is through the Tressel Institute for Leadership and Teamwork. We've collected a set of successful business and nonprofit leaders to serve as guest servant leaders in partnership with the Sokolov Honors College to teach university students teamwork, leadership, and personal skills. We teach from a foundation built on gratitude, excellence, hope, love, and selflessness. If you're a young person or parent helping to search for a unique college experience, you can learn more at tresselinstitute.ysu.edu or ysu.edu. Links will be provided in the show notes. You were a GA there and then full-time there, or?
Nope, and then I went 1 year down in Florida, and that was Coach
You were with
Myers.
Urban?
Coach
Okay,
Myers'
yep.
first year, 2005.
Okay.
And then it kind of went from there, and then it got a little crazy. I went to Temple for Al Golden's first year there.
Okay. Huh.
That was the first year at Temple, and Temple was making the transition from being in the Big East.
Yeah.
And wow, what an unbelievable lesson living in Philadelphia, and really kind of having to rebuild that program.
Right.
And he did an unbelievable job of recruiting and saying, listen, this is going to be a multiple year progression here. And we recruited some great players, and there was a time there where multiple NFL players, and that was a unique experience.
Yeah.
But that was 1 year at Temple.
Okay. And then back to BC, right?
And back to BC for 5 years.
And that's where you knew Jim Bowman.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because when you first came back to Ohio State, obviously we always keep track of our baby here and say, anyway, I was talking to Jim Bowman. I said, Coach Day? I said, I've heard of him, but I don't know him. He said, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He said, I was with him at BC, and I'm telling you, he's going to be good. Now, that was not when you became head coach. When you came back here, and he couldn't say enough. And Bowles and I were together for 5 years at Youngstown State, and then 10 years here. And
wow.
And he was the kind of guy that he taught team every day. And if your staff, if they're singing out of the same hymnal you are, just like in a business,
so important.
The CEO can say whatever they want and have these fancy programs, but those next few layers and talking about it every day.
Oh man.
To me, that if it's important, then it needs to be talked about every day, and that's why on our winner's manual it was always team was above everything else. Mm-hmm. And it was critical. And so you spent 5 years, and that was who? Adavasio or no?
Yeah. So at that point, that was Jeff Jagosinski, and then Frank Spaziani.
Oh, Spaziani. Okay.
Yeah. So that was that run there.
Yeah.
And that's when Matt Ryan was there.
Mm-hmm.
Luke Kuechly.
Mm-hmm.
We had a great run.
I'm still mad at Luke Fickle because I don't think we recruited Luke Kuechly when we were here. In fact, because I had more people say to me, "Hey, that guy was from Ohio. Did you guys recruit him?" Well, as you know, as the head coach, whoever the position people bring you and, whatever. So I always tease Luke,
We know he was a safety, and so maybe.
Oh, I know, he was a
kind of got caught up, but man.
That just goes to show you it's not all about
That's right.
your talent.
The talent, right.
It's about what kind of person you are and how much do you want to develop. And so from there, out west?
Yeah, so then I went down to Temple to be a coordinator with Steve Adazio, and then came back to Boston College. So we're kind of doing this back and forth.
With Steve, yeah, okay.
Back and forth.
So when did you go to the Niners?
And then we went back to Philly with Chip. So poor Nina. I mean, we're going back and forth.
Right.
Back and forth.
She's going to set the record for U-Haul.
Yeah, but we agreed early on that we knew when the kids were young that we were going to have to make some sacrifices, and it's going to be hard, and we're going to have to move quite a bit. But all three kids were born in Boston, and baptized at Boston College. And actually, my third daughter, Nia, was born the day after the Boston bombing.
Oh my!
In Brigham and Women's. And so just the other day we watched a documentary on Netflix. We're telling the story of where we were, where they were, and they didn't know the story.
Right.
Wow. But had great experiences in Boston. But then got to Philly with Chip. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was the next move. And then out to San Francisco when he went out to San Francisco for that year.
So did you get to know the DeBartolo and York family at all when you were out there? Good Youngstown people?
That's it. They were great. They were great.
Yeah.
Had a lot of great conversations with Jed and those guys. They were really good and do a great job.
No, and had a heck of a team this year. I was a little nervous though going into the game. I thought, that Mahomes.
I know.
You know, if you let him touch the ball near the end,
he's magical.
You know, it's going to be. So when you're in the NFL, contrary to some of the places you were, where you were really in building stages.
That's right.
A lot of places,
exactly
going over and taking over, which to me is more valuable experience than anything.
No question.
When I went to Syracuse with Dick McPherson, I learned more in those first 2 years that we tried to build that thing, because you don't have everything going for you. You better be a team, you know. And so how was it different, talking team,
yes,
in the NFL, Philly and San Fran, than what you had experienced before that?
I think, you know, looking back on my time in the NFL, it seems to me like, you know, there's carryover year to year, but there's a lot of turnover year to year. And so when everybody comes together, they come together not always on their own accord. You know, they may be traded, they may have said, well, you know, they got franchised and those things. So, you know, it's like you don't really get a feel for what kind of team you have until maybe the end of September, beginning of October. And it takes time. And one of the things I learned quickly in college is, I mean, in the NFL, is that, you know, you have to bring it every day. You know, those guys will respect you, they'll listen to you, but you have to have the confidence every day in front of those guys. And if they think they're getting better, they'll listen to you. And I think as a coaching staff, that's really important in that league, more than maybe even in college. I mean, you have to know what you're doing in college, but in that league, they have to feel like you're giving them an edge. You're getting them better every day.
Well, and they've been coached a lot.
That's right.
Up to that point. They know a little bit more.
Right.
But in terms of, because it is so transitory, I remember the short time I spent with the Colts, every Wednesday we had 6 new guys.
I know.
And it's like, this poor special teams coach, you know, I mean, that guy had the worst job of it. Oh my gosh, I lost 4 of my guys.
You got to fit a guy in.
And so, smaller group.
Yes.
Much larger variation in age.
Yep.
Huge variation in what they're getting paid.
Right.
Right? What are some of the intentional things that you did, or, you know, as you think about it, you know what we could have done to mold that group together?
I think that the veteran guys and the guys who get paid the most, so the quarterback, those guys that aren't in and out of the building, they're the ones that have to be the strong part of it. You know, you think back on the Patriots run, and it was Brady, and you see what's going on with the Chiefs right now, and it's Mahomes. I mean, that quarterback has got to be strong in terms of leadership. So, you know, he has to build trust within the entire organization. And then as people come and go, you can kind of pull guys in, and as you start to feel what that team's going to be like in October, then you can make your run into December. But that quarterback is so important. That whoever that guy is on defense, whether it's, you know, the Mike linebacker or maybe it's a safety, it kind of depends on, you know, who you have and who those guys are and who the marquee players are. But they're the ones that have to be strong, and they have to, you know, build trust. How do you do that? You build that through your character, who you are. You build it through connection, spending time, and then you build it through your competence. Do you know what you're doing when you're on the field? But if they're just going to go into their locker room, walk in and walk out, it's just not going to work. It's not going to sustain itself to be a Super Bowl team.
Just had that conversation with AJ on the earlier episode, because we got to be around the DeBartolo family and go out and visit and this and that, and it was so obvious that Montana, Rice, Lott, you know, Roger Craig, the best guys were going to set the team
pace.
They were going to set that, and you know, we thought about that in college. You know, if the AJ Hawks, well, we got a chance because AJ Hawk is going to be a team guy, and that's probably one of the things we looked at in recruiting. But the competency of, we want the fast guy, we want the, you know, but I would think it would be more difficult in the NFL, you know, than it is. Although the new world in the collegiate ranks, there's more disparity in how long someone's been here. It's not like, well, I'm going to count on these 4th and 5th year guys because there aren't as many. Or I've got some guys coming in for just 2 years. Or, you know, our scholarship used to be everyone was broke. now the guys aren't broke. And so I'm sure it's even more difficult. In fact, we talk often that culture is always important, team's always important, maybe more important today in your world than when you started.
There's no question. There's no question. Yeah. And the best team is going to win it all in the end.
Right.
But to your point, somebody can come in year 4 and year 5 and maybe become a leader, but that's hard to sustain over time.
Yeah.
And so, I think about these guys who decided to forego, the NFL draft to come back for that 4th or 5th year was huge. That's huge. But then you can put some pieces in of people who have to fit. They have to fit the culture, and that's one of the things I talk to our staff about. Is that it's their job to identify the skill set or the talent, and see, hey, this guy can play a linebacker. This guy can play safety, and we like this part of it. My job to see if they fit Ohio State. And there's a lot that comes with Ohio State. Ohio State's different than other schools. And, it's not for everybody. And I think now more than ever, you have to open up your doors and say, this is who we are. Right. Here are the challenges. Here are the things that are great about Ohio State. And allow them to take that step towards you. Yeah. And tell them all the reasons why we think it's great. Show them all the great things that come with being a Buckeye. But if they do that, when things go bad or they have a bad day or something, they hit adversity, they're going to hang on to it. They're not just going to go jump in the portal. And I think that's something we focused on now, is just being very, very transparent in recruiting, open up our doors, and being really good about the way you recruit them is the way you treat them once they're here, so that you can have that sustainability throughout time.
And they need to know what they're walking into, and that's why I always felt it was important that there's no question we wanted to be champions. There's no question I wanted them to go to the NFL.
Yep.
Because I know that's what they wanted.
Sure.
Their favorite subject at Ohio State's football.
Got it.
No question.
Yeah.
But we're going to do everything. We're going to make you become the best husband, son, father, community servant, student.
Yep.
Long-term health, etc. And if you just want to do that, you're probably not going to be happy.
That's right.
And like you say, they need to know what. So then when you get them here and you are talking about team and holistic approach, and it's not like, well, that's not what they talk to me
about, right?
Right? Yeah. Hey, teammates, I just want to briefly interrupt one more time to give a shout out to a great local manufacturing company, Compco, as a sponsor for our journey. We aren't going to be helping them sell much of their product of steel tank heads on this podcast. They just believe in the mission of teamwork and intentional selflessness. I've known the Smith family since my coaching days at YSU. They've been a beacon in the Youngstown area, providing great jobs and supporting our community through youth programs and local nonprofits like the United Way. The Smith family have been instrumental in backing this project from the start. Thanks to the whole Compco team for joining us sight unseen on this exciting venture. These are team-first people. So when you moved from being an assistant for how many years?
Boy, 15, 16?
Yeah. To become the head coach, I know I went 11 years as an assistant, and then I became a head coach, and all that time that I was thinking, I don't know why the head coach is doing this. Then I became the head coach. I was like, ooh.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, now I know why they were thinking. But in terms of the team, building the team, how did your lens change when you became the head coach?
I think the thing that I realized is, as the head coach, you got to be looking on the horizon to figure out what's coming next. I think that's more of a military approach of, the soldiers and the captains. I mean, they're in the trenches, they're working, and you have sometimes get in the trenches with them. That's important. But it's our job, as the general, to be looking on the horizon to figure out what's coming next, and make sure that they all have the vision to recognize where we're all going. I think that probably that was important for me to learn. Every year you learn more and more. Sure. I think the next thing I learned was you got to have the right people in the right spots. You got to have the right people in the right, and you got to. This job isn't for the faint of heart. You got to make hard decisions, and when you care a lot about relationships and you care a lot about people, but you also know what's at stake, and you have to have the courage to make change sometimes when it's not easy.
Yeah.
And I think those are probably the things that I've learned the most in my 5 years.
Yeah, the decisions are easy when you're the assistant sitting there saying to yourself, we ought to be doing this, but you're not. But it's funny you bring up that part about the vision and the landscape. And I just finished an article by a guy named Robert Greenleaf. And it's not a new article. And I don't even know who gave it to me. And one of the things that he was talking about was that a real good servant leader who's serving the team, the best interest of the whole, he said certainly has to be a historian, because you have to know
where you are,
no question, and how things, what was the design that got Ohio State to where they are today, and the good and the bad, and the game, the evolution of offense, defense, training, recovery, diet. You've got to be a good historian. And then he said, you have to be a good contemporary analyst, meaning you need to analyze, everyone's talking about data analytics and AI and all that. Well, that's not new. I mean, we just didn't have computers. We had, handwritten, we used to hang the film on the paper clip, and then splice it together and analyze third down or whatever. But contemporary analyst about what's going on now in the game, in the business, in society, whatever, which made sense to me.
Yes.
I'm a believer in history. I'm a believer in, knowing cutting edge, competence, giving our people the best chance to succeed, whether it's in football or in their job. But the one I'd never really thought too much about was, he said, and the third thing that a great servant leader needs to be is a prophet. And he's the one that has to keep in consideration what we've learned about history, what we've learned about the contemporary analytics, but how's its effect going to be on the future? And, we talk a lot about what's going on in our beloved sport and college athletics, and I think back to some of the history, and I think back to some of what's going on now, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure throughout the course of years we've been good prophets for our game. We've allowed some things that, we might have said, this is a good idea based on history and contemporary analytics, but did we think about, I wonder what the effect is going to be? And that's a daunting responsibility for a leader, to try to predict the future. But as you're trying to build a team, isn't that what we owe, to all those guys? And so it's pretty cool that you bring up that yes, your scope is much wider when you're the head coach. Like, man, I didn't know I had to think about all this stuff. But your responsibility for making sure the conversations are the right ones, and are we thinking about, and that's, I remember when I first got here to Ohio State, and we were trying to analyze, learn about what had gone on before, and we had great teams. I mean, there's always great teams. In fact, I used to tease people all the time, come on, every coach that's been at Ohio State wins. So, but, you're still trying to analyze history, trying to learn, and trying to, okay, well, here's what's going on in the world, and did we make good decisions? So you're trying to find places, where can we get better? And we used to always say, build on vivid recall of past successes, but then learn what's it going to take to have future successes, and what's going to be the impact. And that's our job with our staff, so that we're helping our kids, to me, but that's the exciting part. There's a whole bunch of things about being a head coach that aren't exciting, right? But the exciting part is, man, I have that responsibility to be that prophet, along with my staff. My staff has to,
No, I think you bring up some really good points. I'm going to hopefully I remember all these, because as you were talking, there's so many things that I just thought of when you were going through that. So one of the things, it's on YouTube. You can pull it up. It's probably a 5-minute video that we did a few years back that Archie narrated, and it talks about the past, the present, and the future, and it goes through the 100 years of Ohio State. It's not real long, but it goes through all the things that have come in the past, the traditions. It's something we would talk a lot about. We show all the recruits when they go into the stadium this video, because you have to understand the traditions here. That is a big part of being a Buckeye, because when you play on Saturdays, it means so much. It's not just about you, to your point. But the reason why is because of all these people that have come before, the generations that have watched their grandparents go to games and their parents go to games. And so they have to understand that when they come here. Then there's the present team. And I think the thing that hits me with that, we talk about our culture and everything, but even since I've become, in 2018 to now, whether it was COVID or some of the things that have happened, Jerry Emig, our SID, we've gone through a lot, and even in 4 years. Mm-hmm. And so we just kind of laugh about how every year there's something new, and that the natural order of the universe is chaos. It's just the way it is. And so you look back on the history, there's been times where everybody's just thrown up their hands and just been like, man, this is just too much. This is chaotic. This is crazy. Where are we going next, right? I can't, this new stuff, right? Well, we're kind of like that right now in college football at times with everything that's going on. And so the easy thing to do is throw up your hands and just say, well, this is, the NIL and this is, the portal and everything. But that's the natural order of the world. And so to figure out what's coming next, to your point. And so, we talk about the past, talk about the present, and then we talk about the future, and we ask the question, who's next? Mm-hmm. Who are the next people that are going to come to Ohio State and continue this tradition, even though it may look different? But then again, it looks a lot different now than it did in the 20s, in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 90s, and now it's going to look different in 5 to 10 years from now.
Well, and that's the fun of, we know it's the only thing constant is change.
Right.
And we know that the common out people have is, oh, this is crazy.
Right.
So, well, you know what? That's the rules of engagement right now. And we have to do it the best so that the decisions we make, we've got to be able to look out into the future saying that was the right decision.
Right.
And then when things don't go the way we want, we can always go back and say, you know what? Here's what we learned.
That's right.
And go forward. And it's, to me, the chaotic times I thought were important. In fact, times occasionally we would create some tension.
You mentioned that before, yeah.
When, everyone was just telling us we're wonderful and, patting us on the back. And, you and I have talked about that book, Talent is Never Enough, because the Buckeyes are going to be talented. We always are, but, that's not enough.
Exactly.
Well, America is talented, but, being a team, being a civilization, being a country, how do we continue to work on that? Because our talent, human civilization has proved that there have been 250, 300 years of, constant change.
That's right.
And it's, we used to every year read a book. And we would study the book as a team through the preseason and then try to apply it. And the players sometimes would have input in the book, the staff would have input in the book, and a book we used after we won national championships was the same book. And it was written way back out in the West Coast, and it was called, If It Ain't Broke, Break It, and Find a Better Way. Because the minute you have a great year or everyone thinks everything's wonderful, and you say, oh, well, let's just carry on. We're wonderful. While the other folks are working.
Yeah, they're grinding.
They're trying to find a way. And so that book, If It Ain't Broke, Break It, became a little bit of our reminder that, okay, yeah, some good things happened, or they're saying nice things. That's the most dangerous times, right?
Yeah.
You kind of love it when the media is telling you things aren't wonderful, because you can kind of lock arms and say, but when they're telling you you're wonderful, and
not good.
Aunt Bessie's telling the kid he's wonderful, and Mom's saying they're wonderful, and Dad, and that's what's fun about being a head coach, is trying to assess, what's going on and what can we do, to build a team.
That's right.
So
and just hitting on that, 'cause I think what that is, that's kind of looking at the horizon, figure like what you're saying right there. Like, here's what's coming.
Yeah.
We're getting all this praise, and
Right.
we're going to get fat, and we got to make sure that we're on top of it. And I think as a coach, like on the day-to-day, I talk to our staff all the time about coaches. It's our job to help. Like, there's a difference between a player and a pro. There's a difference between a really good coach and an expert coach. And the pros, to me, are the ones that when they're in a situation, whether it's making a decision, at a board table, or whether it's linebacker making a decision on the field. The pros remember. They remember something that maybe in the past they made a mistake on, but they learned from it.
Yep. Yep.
Or maybe they've already played the contingency plan in their head and they got a plan for it in that moment. The average ones, they're kind of reacting. They're figuring it out, or maybe inexperienced.
Yeah,
They're not
right.
the pros. I bet we've been there. You figure it out,
Haven't
but
had enough reps to be a pro.
That's it.
Yep.
But when you've had it, okay, I made this mistake. I got to learn from this. The next time, I'm ready for it.
Yep.
But I think it's our job as coaches to continually put these different ideas out here. What if this happens? If this happens, this happens.
Yep.
And we have to keep doing that. But even as coaches and as leaders, we have to continually try to figure out what these contingency plans are for if that happens.
Yep.
Because the pros are the ones that can remember either what they've physically done or something they've built a plan for.
And they have a plan for anything that's going to happen.
That's it.
I remember sitting with one of my teams one year saying, okay, we're 3-0, and I was sitting with my senior group.
Yeah.
Some people have a leadership council, some senior. I happened to be sitting with my seniors, and I said, okay, we're 3-0. Tell me what messaging needs to go on, because everyone's going to start saying, we're wonderful, and it's okay. Kind of went around the room, whatever. Okay, we're 4-3. Well, the year before they'd been undefeated and we'd lost in the playoffs. I said, no, now we're 4-3. So we went around the room. Yeah, well, here's what we're going to have to do. Wouldn't you know it, we were 4-3. And I'll never forget, those seniors had already rehearsed in their mind, not that they wanted to be 4-3, but they'd rehearsed in their mind because they'd been given a rep.
They were ready.
If you will. They were ready.
Yep.
And we went 8 straight and won the national championship. And to your point, that's what we owe to our people to build a team is, hey, it's not going to be all bed of roses.
Nope.
How are we going to react when such and such happens? And now the hard part, which you know way better than I do, is there's not enough hours in the day to cover every situation. And how do you know when they're listening?
That's right.
That's the hard part.
That's it.
Until they real life live it. Now we had in that one particular illustration, it was still raw that we got beat in the playoffs and we got upset by Central Florida. I mean, it was still an open gash wound. So they were listening
Yep.
and they were rehearsing that, okay, you know what, if we're 4-3, we're still, we're not going to be denied or whatever. And so it's going to be a fun new phenomenon for you guys with the larger number of playoff teams.
Oh, yeah.
And
it's going to be a whole different experience.
Yeah.
But, that comes into play at Ohio State because you have these wounds,
coming off the last year, unless you won them all.
Right.
And
that's the hard part.
That's the hard part.
That's the hard part.
So when you come into the next year and you can get into a rhythm here and you can win some games here, but if the focus is on the result, not good.
No.
It has to be on the process. It has to be on your habits, because in matchup games down the road, in the playoffs, in the rivalry game, like if we're not at our best in these areas, if we're not getting better at our fundamentals, if we're not focusing on the process, it's going to catch us. And so I've shared that with our staff, multiple times, and I think that's really something that we have to continually work on throughout the year, because you can run off 10 or 11 games here, and you have to make sure the guys understand. Now, when you have young players who haven't been through it before, it's a lot harder than if they've been through it before and then not finished the way you want to finish.
Right.
So we're counting on these leaders, to be veteran enough to say, hey man, we got to focus on the habits and we got to focus on the process, not on the outcomes of these games.
Well, and that's the fun of being a coach, because every single year is different.
It's different.
Now, ironically, I remember after 2002 when we won the championship, that is so, in some ways, even harder, because so many people are saying, oh, you guys are wonderful and this and that, and you as a natural competitor, now you don't even take 1 second to reflect on, hey, I'm so proud of these guys and these coaches and this university, and so that's the good news and the bad news about being a coach. It's no fun when it doesn't end right, but it's no fun even when it does end, right?
Exactly.
Your life doesn't change, but your life is good.
Yeah.
Because it's all fun of it. So let me move to this, because this has been awesome. We could sit here and talk all day. We're talking about the team, and it's all about the team, and we know how blessed we are to head coaches at Ohio State. Come on. I mean,
Right.
how many people in the world that know anything about football wouldn't love that? But what I love about what I've seen you and Nina do is, you've embraced the university, you've embraced the James Cancer, you have the mental health fund.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about, those things, because I know you talk to your players about them, that, hey guys, all these people are coming to watch you play. You need to go do something for lots of other people.
Yeah. Well, when you come to Ohio State, it's so big. And what I mean by big is the platform that you have here. And if you're not utilizing that platform, then you've missed an opportunity. And when it's all said and done, listen, if you don't win enough games, you're going to find a new coach. But ultimately, it comes back to the impact that you have on the people, on the community. And we want to make sure that that's a part of what we do. And I want to make sure the players see that, because as the leader, if I'm leading the way, or if as coaches we're leading the way, then they're going to follow. And it's just amazing to me, the community that Ohio State has provided so many people for centuries now. And like, for instance, what you were talking about with with our hospital system here, and it just blows me away at the type of care that folks can get over there. And so I read about how Woody Hayes would go over there on Mondays. He would visit the hospital and kind of cheer up some folks and do his visits and do his rounds. And things have changed, like we've talked about. I can't do that on a Monday. But what we do is we send players over. And the players go over and spend time, and that's been great for the folks over at the hospital. And the mental health part of it, that was something that we jumped in early on. Nationwide Children's does an unbelievable job here with, it's really one of the only behavioral health hospitals for adolescents and teenagers in mental health crisis in the entire country. And what they do down there is unbelievable. And it's hard to find a bed.
Wow.
Now more than ever.
Yeah.
Folks need that type of care, and access has become very, very important in the mental health world. And then, so we jumped on that early, and then, just a couple years ago, Nina and I decided to make a donation to what's going on here at the university level. And Dr. Lawan Fawn has put together this program where he's trying to identify the risk factors towards mental health issues. They did that study in Framingham back when they were trying to figure out heart disease.
Yeah.
Just almost 50 years ago now. Well, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to get out in front of it and figure out, what are the risk factors? Is it environmental? Is it social? Is it things that happen along the way? What are the things that lead to it? And so being a part of that has been an honor. But again, just the people who care about this university is unlike any other place in the country. And so to be a part of it is an honor, and to give back means a lot to our family.
That whole mental health discussion, to me, ties so deeply into the team discussion. If you're a part of a team, family, or community, an athletic team, you certainly have a lot of support. That if you're trying to make it out in this world by yourself. And you think about how we've made it easier to try to exist on your own with the cell phone thing, or people working remotely, or taking online classes rather than being we have set up an opportunity to lose a little community.
That's right.
To lose a little team. And that's why I love talking about team, and I love talking about people that are passionate about team, and I can't thank you enough.
No, it's an honor. It's always an honor.
Being a part of it, and
I appreciate it.
We're just, every day we can add value. That's what we're here for.
And I'm looking forward to seeing the other podcasts that you do. I think it's an excellent topic and an honor to be on.